Howdy, folks. It's been a rough few weeks, hasn't it? The results of the American presidential election came out earlier this month, and I, like many other people, am a little bit worried about the next 4 years, specifically regarding trans healthcare and the laws that will inevitably come out that will negatively impact me and people like me. And this is a scary situation for the next 4 years. A lot of people are scared, specifically trans folks and other minority groups. I am scared. My friends are scared, and, it's okay. It's okay to be scared. At this point, I'm really at a loss of what to do. I live in a rural community in a red state where transphobia is unfortunately very, very common. My living situation is stable. I'm going to be mostly okay, but if things go south, I don't have enough money to save to move to another state or better city, let alone leave the country if it comes down to it. I am fairly stuck. That being said, I am okay, and because of where I'm at, I'm likely to be okay throughout whatever happens. And I know that there's a lot of people in a lot of worse places than what I have right now, but I want to make sure to say that if you are in a rough space and you need to leave, it's okay, and I can't tell you what to do, but if it comes down to it, I want to encourage you to keep trying to be okay. Even if it's just okay, even if you're not great, just keep going. Keep living. Sometimes it's all we can do, and, it's okay. Even just being alive can make all the difference. Alright, now that I have my little doom and gloom session over, I wanted to talk about why I'm making this video. I found a lot that when we discuss transness in media, whether it's other people who are discussing it for the better or for worse, transness in general is just portrayed as this huge issue. It's this huge thing that it really needs to be addressed, or it will ruin our country. But there's a double standard within it, where even though in our government we discuss it so often, people being trans, it's in our local communities, it's a lot harder to discuss it. It's taboo. It's this thing that we can't talk about because people will be offended, whether they're trans people who will be offended or just other people in our community who have to live around us. And because transness is now so deeply taboo, I've found that a lot of people who ultimately don't know very much about transness to begin with are now super, super hesitant and adverse to even discussing it at all. Their comfort and their discomfort and their fear that they will be judged for their opinions is just so overwhelming that even when talking with, say, just a trans person, they won't discuss it. They will just kind of brush the conversation off and leave because they're just so uncomfortable by it. And this makes me really, really sad because I have a deep value for open discussion, and I think with how many laws have been being passed and how much of a stigma around discussing transness has been built up over the years, I think that this country really, really could use some open discussion surrounding people who are trans. And this stigma and this uncomfortableness and this taboo surrounding the subject makes it so much more difficult for us to have a conversation that needs to be had. And I don't know what to do about it other than make this video. I mean, all of this social discomfort, it doesn't impact everybody on a daily basis. It really is only forced on trans people who want to discuss their lives and their experiences. It honestly makes the lives of trans folks so much harder. And it's so much harder than it has to be, because whenever I or other trans people bring up their experiences or their important things that they've experienced that they can bring to the table, it's often just met with discomfort and this dis-ease and this desire to leave and not be a part of it and not to address it. And it makes communicating on a deeper level so much harder, especially for trans people like me who want to share their stories and think it's incredibly valuable for us to be able to help explain to other people what we experience, whether it be gender dysphoria or transphobia or how we decided to choose gender affirming care. It's a valuable thing that we have to tell people about. We can help other people become less uncomfortable with the subject, but because of the stigma that's grown over the past couple of years, I've found it harder and harder to discuss with other people about it without them chickening out and running away from me because they don't want to be uncomfortable. And this is why I wanted to make this video, to share my story. I don't need to debate anybody as to whether trans people are real or not. I don't want to attempt to justify why I'm trans. I don't want to invalidate my existence for you, and I won't. I just want to share my story on my own terms in a way that I think best explains how I ended up where I am. And with any luck, maybe this will encourage some of those who feel a lot of anxiety surrounding the concept of transness to feel more comfortable in asking their questions and to possibly open up to understanding where some of us are coming from. So, where do I start? I guess I should probably introduce myself. My username on just about every platform is Kaz the Bone Eldritch. So if you need a name to call me, everybody else calls me Kaz, you can just go with that. For those of you who aren't familiar with my content, I make art. I'll post silly little animations and occasionally I'll comment on current events, but for the most part, I just stick to my art. I am, for the most part, just another content creator, and I am transgender. So, what does that mean? A lot of trans folks I've found describe their transness as the sensation that they were born in the wrong body. This is a really easy way to explain to people that your body feels wrong, but it doesn't quite explain or describe my experience in the way that I would. For me, personally, a better way to describe this is to say that I was born with an incongruence of sorts. In the same way that children can be born with limb differences, blind, deaf, or with a developmental disorder, I wasn't born in the wrong body. I was just born differently. I was born in such a way that either my mind or my body developed past the other along the way, leaving me with a somewhat male-ish mind and a somewhat female-ish body, which is, well, an incongruence. And this incongruence is just called being transgender nowadays. Now, turn back the clock more than a few years from now. I don't even know where to start. Was it my birth? Should I start when I was in kindergarten? I mean, it's not like I had this big, massive shift where I was just suddenly somewhere else. where all of a sudden my gender just changed. Even after I came out, it wasn't like I was all of a sudden a different person. It may have appeared like that to the people around me in my life, but to me, there wasn't even a difference at all. It's always the way that I am now, so it's not really possible to pinpoint an exact moment where I know it began. I do, however, have a vague idea of when I started to realize that I was a little bit different. Oh my god, that sounds so cringe. It is funny though. It's a funny way to say it. I really could not have cared less about gender as a kid. I just happened to get placed into a social category, and there weren't any major consequences, so I just didn't care. And if you asked me if I could have chosen to be a boy if I would have, I probably would have said yes. But as I mentioned before, I was really honestly more preoccupied with learning to draw and playing around in the dirt, and I did not give a shit about gender. I don't know if this is ever really a thought in anyone else's mind, but if you look at children, their gender isn't really important, especially the younger they are. I mean, half the time you can't even tell if they're a boy or a girl unless their parents tell you, or they're dressed head to toe in pink versus blue. When you're young, gender doesn't really influence all that much of your social life. I mean, even just on a physical level, children aren't really that different from each other. I didn't even truly begin to experience gender dysphoria until middle school, when the bodies of mine and my peers began to change. Whilst the other boys grew taller, had their voices change, and grew facial hair, my body decided that it hated me, and I got stuck with the biggest, most back-breaking boobs, the likes of which would have brought upon me the envy of anyone who ever thought that having that much boob was a good thing. If it weren't for the fact that I existed in nothing but the constant state of having a very, very shrimpy posture. As a result, I was plagued with crippling anxiety, and unaware of why I was feeling that way, I ended up a neurotic mess. Now, content warning for those of you who are easily grossed out, I guess. You can come back if you want to in the next 2 minutes. But I will be discussing the results of having so much anxiety. During my middle school years, I developed a fairly serious skin picking disorder as a result of all of the anxiety that I had built up, primarily due to my gender dysphoria. For a period of several years, I would spend a minimum of 3 hours daily in front of a mirror, picking at the skin on my face, arms, neck, and back. Even after my time in front of the mirror was over throughout the day, anytime I felt anxious, I would run my hands along my arms and my neck and just claw at my skin until it bled. I tried my hardest to keep things fairly hidden beneath clothing, but there were many times that I had to go leave class to grab a jacket from my locker because I would bleed through my clothing and my jacket that I had on. I still have plenty of hoodies where the insides of my sleeves are stained with my blood because I would use them to dab up all that I could in an attempt to not be noticed. I frequently had large open wounds on my skin, around the size of quarters usually, but oftentimes they did get bigger. It got to the point where my mother would frequently compare them to bullet wounds. I was fortunate that my face didn't scar too badly, but my neck and my back are unfortunately still covered in very visible scarring. It really wasn't until I was able to socially transition that I began to recover. Even still, I struggle with the urge to rip apart my skin, and I don't know if it's a permanent thing that I will struggle with or if it'll go away eventually. But it's very possible that because I developed this coping mechanism in my early years, my brain will always immediately feel the urge to pull my skin apart whenever I experience stress. And I bring this up to say that anxiety and the pain brought about by gender dysphoria, in my case, has not been inconsequential. My coping mechanisms are often very self-destructive. I can and I have attempted to build healthy coping mechanisms, but the underlying skills that I was supposed to build in my formative years were built around self-destruction. Every coping mechanism that I have worked hard to develop, I have had to develop them from a place that is less than nothing. Throughout my middle school and early high school years, I had the understanding that something was wrong, but I didn't really have the self-understanding or the words to even come close to articulating what was happening. There were many years where I tried to get the feeling that my body was wrong to stop. I tried exercising more, I tried cutting my hair, I tried leaning into religion, hoping I could be fixed somehow. And somewhere in the whole mess of this poor mental health, I even realized that I was not happy that I had breasts. And with that little bit of understanding, I decided that I wanted a mastectomy. There wasn't even a thought surrounding gender, I just knew that they felt wrong. So what did I do? I didn't bring it up to anyone. I didn't even think that might not be a normal thought. I decided I was gonna give myself breast cancer because in my mind that was the only way that I was gonna be able to get a mastectomy. I didn't even search up if there was any other options. I just committed to carrying my little Verizon flip phone in my bra because I hoped so deeply that I would give myself cancer, because I would rather have cancer than to continue on living as I was. Needless to say, I was absolutely devastated when I overheard one of my teachers discussing how the potential for phones to cause cancer was so very little that it essentially wouldn't have made much of a difference. So I struggled on with another half year of school, and then the COVID pandemic hit. It got a little bit easier for me after that, and I realized that I didn't really have to present femininely in public. I still felt this deep panic of dysphoria, but as my environment was less strict and I wasn't forced to exist in public as often, I was able to manage it a little better. I survived the pandemic with all of my senses intact, and the next year, life resumed some semblance of normalcy, which is much to my disappointment. It was the next year that I had the option to take a semester-long sociology course with my high school. Because of the pandemic, my school had changed the schedule, and we were using a new schedule that consisted of far too many classes within the daily schedule. My mental health began to drop once again, and my grades, like my health, dropped. I barely managed to keep my grades above C's that year, but still, despite nearly failing the class, the sociology class was a bit of a bright spot in my day. One day in early November, I don't even remember what the topic we were assigned was. Probably had something to do with marginalized communities, but we were assigned to do our daily reading, which included a very short, maybe half a column long segment on the queer community. I read through it, and then the segment after, which happened to be an even smaller segment on gender diversity. I kid you not, it was so small, there were like 2 sentences discussing trans people. It was nothing. The segment itself was mostly comprised of how dressing outside and presenting beyond the gender binary is often frowned upon and is taboo. And then behind that, it had a little couple of, maybe 2 sentences where it said something along the lines of how some people are transgender and their gender doesn't align with their bodies. And at this point, I was like, wow, this is a real thing that people are allowed to do. And in my mind, I was like, wow, that's very cool, but I'm not like that. I can't do that. I'm not allowed to be a man. That's not allowed. It's very silly. And then the next line was, and some people don't feel like a man or a woman at all. And then my brain broke for a moment, and I was like, oh shit, that makes so much sense. And then for the 6 months after that, I proceeded to have a 6-month-long identity crisis where at the end of it, I came out as a gender pan and a Satanist. I don't know how things shook out, to be honest. I don't even remember 90% of what happened after those 6 months. I just know that they did, and I was able to come out of it. The years following, I was able to come out to my family. Everything went well. Been living my best life ever since. And don't get me wrong, I've had so many weird experiences where people can't process that I'm trans. I've had people offended by my existence. I've had some really weird questions, and at one point I even had a previous employer potentially hold a secret meeting about my pronouns without me. People are really weird. I might share those experiences in a later video if you folks are interested, but those stories are not for today. When it comes down to it, I'm literally just some dude, and when you take away all the stigma of labels and the fear of being woke or the fear of being not woke, you're left with what is transgender. It's just an incongruence between your body and your mind, and that's all that it is. It's not a virus you can catch. It's not a cult. It's not a secret society dedicated to mutilating children. It's simply an incongruence of the mind and the body, and that is how I, and I'm assuming many others, experience it. That incongruence can cause things like dysphoria and anxiety, and can impact both an individual's health and the way they interact in society. It's certainly impacted my life a lot, and honestly, it's why it's important that we discuss things like this, because so often our transness isn't taken seriously. Anyway, I had my name legally changed last year. No regrets. Got top surgery months ago. No regrets. And in light of the election results and the risk of losing access to gender-affirming care for all trans people, I decided that it was time for me to start HRT. It took me a couple weeks to call just about every clinic offering HRT within a 10-hour radius of where I live, and somehow I managed to find a clinic 7 hours away accepting patients. So I made my way across 7 hours of absolutely nothing America, and I got cleared for HRT. And, well, I got my prescription in today, and surprise, this is my first day on testosterone, so I guess this is my voice one day on T.